here in Niagara Falls. Thank you so much for coming out this evening to learn more information about 5G technology. I already have a lost and found item, so we're going to take care of that first. Did anybody leave these two books over at the registration desk? There we go, Chris. You win the prize. Thank you. Few housekeeping items. Washrooms are straight down the hall to your left. Our session should be going from about 6:30 to 8:30. We do have the room a little bit longer. Our three speakers will talk, and then you have an opportunity to ask questions. And we would ask that you come to this microphone to ask your questions. We are streaming live on Facebook Live. We'll have the ability to post the link later on that you can check it out and show it to your friends. We have three amazing panelists today, and I'm going to introduce them. Our first one is Magda, Havas, Bachelor of Science, PhD, Professor Emerita, and she's the first one on our left. Magda Havas is Professor Emerita at Trent University in Peterborough, Canada. She does research on biological effects of electromagnetic pollution and on the beneficial effects of electromagnetic therapies. Dr. Havas works with diabetics, people with multiple sclerosis, tinnitus, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, heart palpitations, and those who are electrically hypersensitive. She serves as a science advisor to various government and non-government organizations in Canada, US, Europe, UK, South Africa, Nepal, and Australia. She is co-author of Public Health SOS, The Shadow Side of the Wireless Revolution, and has authored more than 190 publications. Since 2000, Dr. Havas has given hundreds of invited lectures in more than 30 countries on the health effects of electrosmog. Her passion is to help those with electro-hypersensitivity and to help educate healthcare providers about the perils of electromagnet pollution. Please help me welcome Dr. Havas. Next, we have Meg Sears, PhD, is an environmental health researcher at the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute and chairperson of the National Civic Society organization Prevent Cancer Now. She has prepared expert analysis and reports regarding health effects of low-level environmental exposures for federal and provincial commissions and tribunals, participated in regulatory consultations, and published in the scientific literature on health effects of numerous harmful environmental exposures, including pesticides, toxic metals, and radio frequency radiation. Dr. Sears is also interested in ethics and scientific methods for assessments and regulation to protect health. She sees that in order to blunt the health and environmental crisis of today, it is necessary for regulators and governments, including in particular municipalities, to shift to make pragmatic, least toxic choices and decisions. Please help me welcome Meg Sears. And lastly, we have Frank Clegg. Frank has been in technology sector for 40 plus years. His last position was president of Microsoft Canada. He is the founding CEO of Canadians for Safe Technology, C4ST, and the co-chairman of the Business Advisory Group to the Environmental Health Trust. Frank is on the board of Indigo Books and Music, Inc. He is a member of the Audit Committee as well as technical advisor to the board. Mr. Clegg has resigned from all other board responsibilities to focus on cancer for safe technology. Prior board director roles include Kobo, AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, Navantis, Kinsa, and Pelmorix. Mr. Clegg's leadership saw Microsoft Canada join forces with Toronto Police Services to develop an online child exploitation investigative tool and tracking system to enable collaboration and information sharing among police services across Canada and around the world. This evolved to the creation of Kinsa, a not-for-profit organization with a vision to create a global safety net that protects every child everywhere from online exploitation. Frank recently was the chairman and director of Citizens for Clean Air, a community group that successfully caused the cancellation of a proposed gas-fired power plant in their community and continues its efforts to ensure the safe siting of future power plants in Ontario. Please help me welcome Frank Clegg. Also in the audience tonight, we have some city councilors. I'd like to introduce Carolyn Iannone at the back, over there. Christopher Dabrowski, where did you go, Kristen? Let's see you. He was over at the registration desk when you came in, and are there any other councilors that I missed that you popped in? Okay, no. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Now I'm going to turn it over to Magda, and they're going to have the whole evening. Think about the questions that you'd like to ask, because we would definitely like to hear from you as well. Okay, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lori. Is the sound adequate for people to hear me? I'm going to be discussing 5G as an experiment that's being conducted against our will for those of us who don't want to be exposed to radiation. At this particular presentation, I'm going to be wearing 3 hats. One is a scientist, since I do research on the beneficial and harmful effects of electromagnetic frequencies. I'm also here as an educator. I've been a university professor for the last 20, 30 years of my life, so I'm used to sharing information not only with my students, but with audiences around the world. And I'm here as a member of the community. I'm a citizen just like you are, and I'm also very concerned from that perspective. All of us have values that we hold very dearly, and a number of my values are being threatened because of 5G, and I suspect that's the same for many of you here. One of my top values is freedom. My parents emigrated from Europe following World War II, and they wanted to raise their children in a free country, so freedom is a very important value. And when it comes to 5G, we have no voice. We have no choice, and when you have neither of those, you don't have a democratic system. So many of us, although we're here sharing this information with you, if the powers that be are not listening to us, nothing will happen, nothing will get done. Another value I hold dearly is justice, and we have bullies in schools, in corporations, and in the government. And I'd like to give you one example of bullies in schools. I'm not talking about children who are bullying their other students. I'm really talking about the school administration that's bullying teachers who speak out against Wi-Fi in the classroom. They speak out because their health is being impaired or because they're trying to protect their students. And they're threatened with dismissal and other types of actions if they continue to do that. So we don't have freedom in our schools anymore for our teacher population. A third value that I hold very dearly is honesty. I'm a scientist, and so what I report has to be the truth as I understand it, and I hold other people to that level of values as well. Unfortunately, we're provided with a lot of misinformation, and that leads to ignorance, it leads to distrust, and it leads to conflict. So we're here today because if we don't have honesty, we don't have justice, and if we don't have justice, we don't have freedom. So that's really the primary reason I'm here. I'm a retired professor. I'm not getting paid to do this. So I'm here because I'm really passionate and want to share my understanding of the issues with as large an audience as we possibly can. Now the question is, what is 5G? And 5G stands for 5th generation communication technology. It allows for faster connectivity, which is the way the industry is promoting it. And it's a lot more than just having a very powerful cell phone. It's really leading to something called the Internet of Things. So we're going to have a lot of smart appliances, smart cars that are going to be using this particular technology. It follows 4G, which we have currently, and that was cell phones that allowed for video, 3G that allowed internet access, 2G that allowed texting, and 1G that allowed for voice. So we've come a long way, baby, when it comes to cell phones and how much they've advanced. But as you can see here, 5G is much more than a very powerful cell phone. How does 5G differ from other wireless technology? Well, it's going to be in addition to what we currently have. It's not replacing 4G, it's not replacing 3G, it's going to be yet another band of frequencies that we're going to be exposed to, which means more exposure to microwave radiation. Something that's novel in 5G is they're going to open up the electromagnetic spectrum, and they're going to have higher frequencies that are called millimeter waves. So they're very small waves, and they're going to be above 25 gigahertz, which is 25 billion cycles per second for the frequency. This is the first time that we're using millimeter waves for communication purposes. Why should we be concerned about 5G? Because there haven't been any tests on long-term exposure. A few months ago in February, the Senate held a committee where they interviewed, where they questioned some of the cell phone providers, and they asked them, what tests have you done on the health effects? And every single one of them, from Verizon to AT&T, said, we haven't done any testing on health effects. 2G, 3G, 4G are already causing adverse health effects, so even if we don't introduce 5G, we've still got a pretty serious problem with exposure to microwave and radio frequency radiation. With 5G, it's going to put a lot of people over the top that are still able to function in society. Now, what do we know about the infrastructure for 5G? Well, it's going to consist of a variety of different types of infrastructure. Satellites, they're being deployed right now. Thousands of satellites are going to circle the Earth and send us information. It's going to consist of macro cell sites. These are towers that are going to have multiple antennas, 20, 30, 40, 50 antennas on top of them. We have something called the small cell, and this is going to be an antenna outside of every third to fifth home, depending on how close your homes are on city streets. And part of it is going to consist of fiber optics. So these are the 4 different parts of the 5G rollout. Fiber optics are the safest. They don't radiate. They're very fast. They're secure. This is the way we should be using our technology, by putting it on wire, particularly glass fiber optics. Satellites, for my colleagues who are more familiar with satellite technology than I am, they tell me that this is relatively safe, even though it sounds pretty dramatic to put satellites in space. This is a relatively safe form of technology because the levels of radiation by the time they reach the ground are going to be quite low. They need to be amplified in order to be useful. However, if anyone took control of those satellites and increased the intensity, it could be used as a weapon. Microwaves are currently being used as a weapon, so that's not off the books at this stage. Macro sites are dangerous if you live close to them, so the closer you live to one of these sites, the more radiation you're going to be exposed to. But the one most of us are concerned about are these small cells, because they're going to be the closest to your home. In some cases, just outside, across the street, on the same side of the street, on a lamppost that's near your home. So we're really concerned about them. And they're going to be rolling out hundreds of thousands of these small cells in all communities, so we won't be able to avoid the radiation exposure. Now, this is the microwave spectrum, and it consists of 2 parts. It has ionizing radiation and it has non-ionizing radiation. We know that ionizing radiation is harmful. Non-ionizing radiation is what there's quite a bit of controversy about. It consists of low frequencies, low energy, and long wavelengths. And ionizing radiation is just the opposite. It's high frequency, high energy, and very short wavelengths. The part of the spectrum we're concerned about during this presentation is radio waves and microwaves, and 5G is part of the microwave spectrum. So it fits in, it's a microwave, but they've given it a fancy name called millimeter waves for at least part of the technology that's going to be used. All parts of the electromagnetic spectrum are biologically active, which means there's a biological response to every single frequency in the spectrum. Some of the effects are harmful and some of them are beneficial. So this isn't all about doom and gloom. But using it for telecom communications is what we're most concerned about. Now, why is the telecom industry pushing so much to have 5G deployment without proper testing? In this particular graph, what you see here along the y-axis is the mobile cellular subscriptions per 100 people, and this information comes from the World Bank. So these are cell phones, basically, and you can see from 1985 to 2015, there was a very rapid increase following 1995. And you can see here for a number of countries, it's flattened out. they're not selling any more product. People have as many cell phones as they're ever going to have. That's why they keep coming up with newer models that have other types of technology. So basically the cell phone market is saturated, and the industry needs other types of revenue in order to support the profits that they know that they've been making so far. When it comes to 5G, there's going to be winners and losers. There's probably going to be, according to the telecom industry, trillions of dollars in revenue. And so some people are going to capitalize on that, they're going to make a lot of money. The problem is they're going to be producing trillions of gigabytes of data, and that just means exposure. So the more data there is, if it's coming through a wireless, through an antenna, or through satellites, it means we're going to be exposed to that radiation. Now this is Tom Wheeler, and I'm not certain the microphones are loud enough. If they're not, I might just skip this particular video. Tom Wheeler was the chair of the Federal Communication Commission. He was appointed by President Obama. He also worked for the CTIA, which is the lobby for the cell phone industry. So we have the federal communication that is supposed to regulate the industry, and it's being regulated by their own people. So this is like, the Fox, taking care of the hen house.
Bands that previously thought viable for mobile broadband and other applications. Such millimeter wave signals have physical properties that are both a limitation and a strength. They tend to travel best in narrow and straight lines, and they do not go through physical objects as well. But brilliant engineers have developed new antennas that can aim and amplify signals. Now to make this work, the 5G build-out is going to be very infrastructure intensive, requiring massive deployment of small cells. I'm confident that the actions will lead to a cornucopia of unanticipated, innovative uses. It will generate tens of billions of dollars in economic activity. And that's damn important, because it means that U.S. companies will be the first out of the gate. That is why 5G is a national priority, and stay out of the way of technological development. Unlike some countries, we do not believe that we should spend the next couple of years studying what 5G should be or how it should operate. The future has a way of inventing itself. Turning innovators loose is far preferable to expecting committees and regulators to define the future. We won't wait for the standards. We're already seeing the industry gearing up to seize this opportunity. Verizon and AT&T tell us they'll begin deploying 5G trials in 2017, and the first commercial deployments they're talking about are expected in 2020. And we're not done. As part of our July 14 action, we also plan to ask for comments on opening up other high-frequency bands. Many of the high-frequency bands that we will make available for 5G currently have some satellite users, as well as some Defense Department applications, or at least the possibility of future satellite and defense users.
Now, I don't know how many of you found that disturbing, but I found it deeply disturbing that there's no time to wait for standards. This is too important, so we've got to go ahead. So the fact that some people are going to get sick doesn't really matter, because they're making billions of dollars regarding this technology. Now the question is often asked is, why is the government not doing something about this? Why aren't they slowing down the process? They're the ones that are supposed to be regulating the industry and ensuring that it's safe for public health. And that's because they're making a huge amount of money as well. The Federal Communication Commission in the United States is responsible for regulating the industry, and in 2015, they made $45 billion selling different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum to the wireless industry. So they're not going to put a stop on it, because that's revenue for the country. In Canada, we have Health Canada. They have Safety Code 6, so they're the ones who set the standards in Canada. We have Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada, that used to be called Industry Canada, and they're the ones that are supposed to enforce those standards. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. With very rapid communication, we're going to have wireless cars that are going to emit microwave radiation around them and inside them. Some people won't be able to drive these cars because of the levels of radiation. We already have smart homes, and the people who are becoming sick are usually people who are well educated, have a lot of technology, and live in a smart home, because they're the ones that are exposed to the highest levels of radiation. We're going to have smart cities, and one of the things Tom Wheeler said, everything that can be connected will be connected, and the question is why. He said pill bottles are going to be connected, so if you run out of pills, then it'll send a little message to your phone saying, or to the drugstore saying you need to fill this prescription. A few weeks ago, there was something called the 5G Crisis Summit. There were 40 one-hour lectures or interviews from people around the world, scientists, medical doctors, lawyers, politicians who were interviewed. And these videos are available online. I think the cost is about $59 US to be able to look at them. And I strongly urge any of you who are in a position of decision making, or if you're really interested in learning about what these experts globally think about 5G, it's worth listening. I listened to the whole segment in a week and I did nothing else. And the talks were absolutely brilliant. I learned from every single one of them, so I strongly encourage this. One of the things that a number of the presenters talked about was the Nuremberg Code. Now, the Nuremberg Code is the international humanitarian law that states that it is unethical and illegal to perform experiments on humans without their consent. And what's happening right now is that 5G is an experiment. We don't know what the outcome is going to be, but we're all exposed, and many of us don't want to be exposed, so we have not provided consent to this. If I wanted to conduct research and expose my students to Wi-Fi or people to any of these different sources of radiation, including infants to baby monitors, my university would deny that request for ethical grounds because there's a potential for danger. Yet the wireless industry is able to expose all of us without any consent and without any ethical criteria. During the Holocaust, German doctors sterilized German citizens, and the excuse for doing nothing was it was too horrific to believe this was happening. So people heard of the atrocities and they just couldn't believe it. Like, these are human beings, how could they do something so terrible? Or we were just following orders. Or refusal meant instant death. So the people that were complicit and participating in the Holocaust, in a sense, didn't have much choice because many of them could have lost their lives. When we talk about the side effects of microwave radiation, one of the side effects is damage to sperm and ultimately sterility. There's been more than 24 studies showing that sperm are damaged when they're exposed to microwave radiation. We have evidence of miscarriages, we have evidence of birth defects with exposure of mothers while they have their infants in utero. And the excuse for doing nothing is, I didn't know it was harmful. I don't believe it's harmful. And the government's protecting us. I'm just one person, what can I do? Or I'm past reproductive age, what do I care? Okay? Well, that's fine if you're past reproductive age, but chances are your children and grandchildren are still in that form, so we need to protect them. I'm going to just show you a very short video clip of human sperm. We have an unexposed population and an exposed population to 2.4 gigahertz frequencies, which is the same frequency used in Wi-Fi. This was after 1 hour exposure, and this was after 5 hours exposure. And you can see the sperm here in C1, which is the control 1 hour, and RF1 radio frequency 1 hour. You can see the sperm are doing quite well. They're swimming around. They don't know which direction to go to because they're not in a uterus, so there's no signals as to where they should go. And this is after 5 hours. And if you look at the sperm in the bottom right-hand corner, they're not doing very well. So can you imagine your son or your grandson holding a laptop computer in Wi-Fi mode in their lap for a few hours, it's going to affect their sperm. It's not good enough for contraception, so I don't recommend it for that, but it's not something that's going to benefit the outcome of their reproduction. Now, our love affair with wireless technology really began with the cell phone. We have no choice as to where the antennas are placed. So they can be placed on our buildings if you happen to live in a high-rise building or in front of your home. When it comes to Wi-Fi, we have no choice if they're being placed in schools. Parents who have commented that they don't want their children exposed to Wi-Fi have no say. They have to take them to a school that doesn't have Wi-Fi. We have no choice about smart meters and smart appliances. If any of you have purchased an appliance within the last 3 years, chances are it's a smart appliance, which means it's radiating every few seconds, trying to connect with a smart meter that isn't yet ready to listen to it. And when it comes to 5G, we have no choice as to where that small cell is going to be placed and how many satellites they're going to put into outer space. So the question is, how much radiation can the human body tolerate? It's like smoking. You wouldn't want to expose an infant to smoke. You wouldn't expose your family or your children. Yes, that is really what's happening. So if you wanted to take an analogy, it's basically we're exposing our children to a carcinogen in the classroom. Now, microwave exposure has been increasing exponentially, and this is one of the best ways I feel I can show it. This is a map of the world. It's only showing part of it right here. I wanted to magnify it. There's little purple dots that some of you may be able to see. And these are areas where they have Wi-Fi. Most of them are universities, research institutions, military installations. In 2002, this is what the map looks like in 2018. Okay, we have it in our homes, we have it on boats, planes, ships, classrooms, everywhere. So in 16 years, we've gone from virtually minimal exposure, very limited, to exposure everywhere. And that's just Wi-Fi. Are we currently exposed to millimeter waves, so which is part of the 5G? And the answer is yes. Whenever you go through one of these units and when they're scanning you at the airport, this is using millimeter waves. And I recommend that none of you go through it. If you do go through it, close your eyes. Otherwise, ask them to pat you down. Now, Sheena and I have been traveling quite a bit, and we've asked some of them, we don't go through one of these, we ask them to pat us down, and we've asked the people there if they're concerned about this, and they told us that they use their own bodies to calibrate the machines, and I asked them how often do they go in, and they said about 20 times a day. Some of these people are getting quite ill, and they're keeping the information quiet. The other source of microwave radiation is something called the active denial system, and this is what's being used by the US military. They're using 95 gigahertz frequencies.
These service personnel playing the role of an unruly mob at Georgia's Moody Air Force Base are about to fall prey to an invisible ray. The hulking panel atop this Humvee is part of what the US military calls the active denial system, or ADS. It's designed to incapacitate enemy combatants with an unnerving, non-lethal sensation of intense heat. Watch as the ray silently strikes and scatters the crowd.
The active denial system has three great characteristics. First of all, it's safe. Second, it's effective. And third, it has a tremendous range compared to the other non-lethal weapons that today's warfighter has.
This is the heart of this 100 kilowatt transmitter. This is the gyrotron. 200 kilowatts of electricity is fed in, and 100 kilowatts of radio frequency comes out. That millimeter wave energy comes out of an aperture underneath the main reflector, hits the subreflector, which illuminates that main reflector, and sends a roughly antenna-sized beam downrange. Those holes that you see in the antenna are for the cameras and other visual equipment that the operator uses so that he knows exactly where that beam is going.
It's operated by a joystick. The operator looks into the console, sees exactly what that antenna is aimed at. He moves the joystick left, the antenna slews to the left, same way to the right. Then when there's an individual who's identified as a troublemaker, he has a cursor. He can put that cursor on that individual, pull the trigger that's on the joystick, and the energy is sent downrange at the speed of light.
The electromagnetic radiation released by the active denial system is similar to the microwaves in your microwave oven, in that it causes the water molecules in the target to become excited and heat up. but that's where the similarity ends. The ADS is designed to heat only the very surface of the skin. It does this by outputting only the carefully chosen radio wave frequency of 95 gigahertz. Even though it can easily penetrate clothing, the ADS generates a much shorter and safer wavelength of radio waves than those used in microwave ovens.
The active denial system millimeter wave directed energy beam reaches 1/64th of an inch into human skin. So that is the most outermost layer of the skin, roughly equivalent to about 3 sheets of notebook paper.
Now, one of the things they don't say is that if you have that radiation affecting your eyes, penetrating your eyes, it can cause cataracts and ultimately different types of eye disease. When it comes to smart technology, and by the way, smart as used with respect to technology only needs two-way communication. It can be wireless or it can be wired, but it's tend to be used for wireless. The key concerns are human health, addiction, social skills, safety, security, privacy. We're concerned about the effects on plants and animals, energy consumption, and global warming. And each one of these is a really big issue. I'm just going to be talking about human health, and at the end, if I have time, I'll mention plants and animals. There are basically 3 types of health effects when it comes to microwave and radio frequency radiation. One is reproduction, and I've talked about that, cancer, and something called electrohypersensitivity. I've talked about reproduction, and next Sears is going to be talking about cancer, so I'm just going to focus on EHS, or electrohypersensitivity. It's an intolerance to electromagnetic frequencies at very low levels well below our national guidelines. It has been around for a very long time. It's called neurasthenia, which is a weakening of the nervous system. Radar, during World War II, when radar was first used, it used microwave radiation, that's what radar is. And the men working on the radar had microwave sickness, they were sick. And that's basically what we're talking about, electrohypersensitivity. The World Health Organization calls it idiopathic environmental intolerance, and they have a medical code now that's for injury to radio frequency or other forms of non-ionizing radiation. So they recognize that this is a serious concern. I call it rapid aging syndrome because that's what it's doing to your body. It's causing the cells in your body to age more rapidly. What are the symptoms? Well, these are some of the more common symptoms. They also include nosebleeds, bedwetting, excessive nightly urination, skin problems, heart palpitations, and the list goes on. What's the evidence for EHS? I'm going to show you 4 different examples. We know that exposure to Wi-Fi affects the blood, and so if you take a drop of blood, put it under the microscope on a slide, and look at it. This happens to be my blood under dark field microscopy. And you can see the cells are nice and round, and there's a few of them sort of freeze, mostly small groups. This is what happens when I expose my blood to Wi-Fi for 10 minutes. Every single cell is sticking together, so I've got really kludgy blood when I'm exposed to this radiation. And Dr. Stephen Sinatra, who's a world-renowned cardiologist, said our blood should have the consistency of red wine, but it's more like ketchup, and that's what this is. This is rouleau formation ketchup. And these are some of the symptoms if your blood happens to show this particular reaction. And some of the worst things that can happen are heart attacks and strokes. And what doctors are reporting is that younger and younger people are having heart attacks and strokes. So the ages of the elderly, or the illnesses of the elderly, are happening at a much younger age. Now, a few years ago, Global 16x9 did a report on Wi-Fi in schools, and this is a short clip from that.
Basically, we have to look at the safety of our children. We have to do it as a society.
Well, 16x9 wanted to test the power of Wi-Fi, so we went to visit environmental scientist Magda Havas from Trent University to do another test. Professor Havas' subject, Martin, who calls himself electrically sensitive, is hooked up to a heart monitor, and Havas sets up a wireless computer.
Well, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking Martin and exposing him to microwave radiation from Wi-Fi, the same type of thing that we have in schools, for example, and just monitoring his heart to see if his heart reacts to any of the radiation. He won't know when things are turned on or off, so it's going to be a blind study in that regard.
With the Wi-Fi plugged in, Martin's heart rate accelerates in mere moments.
Now I can feel something is going through our chest.
completely down on my legs too.
The closer the router is, the greater his reaction.
A few seconds ago, it was like my chest was actually jumping in the middle here.
Then, seconds after the wireless internet is unplugged, just like that, his heart rate slows down.
Martin, how are you feeling right now?
Fine, I don't think there's anything on.
So that's just one example of what some people experience when they're exposed. This is an example of radio frequency that's on our wires in our home. And if you're diabetic and you're electrically hypersensitive, it can affect your blood sugar. This is a type 2 diabetic who doesn't take any medication. She controls her blood sugar by walking. So when her blood sugar is high, she goes for a 20-minute walk. And this is what happens. So this is before the walk, that's the level of blood sugar, and ideally you're aiming for this red line. So 20-minute walk, and these are on 3 different days. It comes down to roughly the same. When it's raining outside, she works on a treadmill. She walks on a treadmill, and this is what happens to her blood sugar. It actually goes up. So when a doctor tells you to exercise, and they don't say that you might not want to walk on something that's electronic, if you're electrically hypersensitive, that would be good advice, but they have no knowledge of this. So by walking on a treadmill, she's actually doing more damage to her system. And that's because there's dirty electricity produced by treadmills, high frequency. This is a woman who has multiple sclerosis. There's dirty electricity in her home, as I've demonstrated here by this symbol. And we put in filters in her home to clean up the electricity. When I interviewed her, she was sitting on her hands, and I asked her why she was doing that, and she said, because my hands shake. So I asked if I could videotape it, and this is how she's trying to hold her hands still. And this is 6 weeks after we cleaned up the dirty electricity in her home. And by the way, this was in 2004, and they didn't have Wi-Fi. It wasn't a common occurrence. So you can see here how, someone with a neurological disorder can be made worse when they have this dirty power in their home. What percentage of the population is adversely affected? I think it's between 3% that are severely affected and a third of the population that has mild to moderate symptoms. For Niagara Falls, we're talking about almost 2,500 people. For Ontario, just under 500,000. And for Canada, we're talking about 1 million people who have severe sensitivity already. Now, some people say this is psychosomatic, and so we've also done research with plants and animals because they're things that we would record with them are not psychosomatic. And this is a pea plant. The plants on the left here were exposed to Wi-Fi. This is after a 30-day period of exposure. And these plants on the right were the controls. When you look at the root system, you can see that with the Wi-Fi exposure, there's virtually no root cells at all, and so a plant can't survive without its roots. So it's affecting plant life as well. And we did research with bees. Now, this is a hive that we painted with radio frequency shielding paint. It's a black paint and painted it white so that the hives wouldn't get hot. And then there's metal foil here to prevent the radio frequency getting in through cracks. So this is a shielded plant hive, beehive.
The fan in the garden, they're just walking around, and they're acting normal.
So they were really quite calm. They were just fanning at the entrance. This is a hive that we exposed to microwave radiation. We put a Wi-Fi router here, and we put a baby monitor and cordless phone, and then we put a microphone in there because we were told that bees make a funny sound just before they're about to swarm. So we exposed the bees to the radiation. They became incredibly docile initially, so they wouldn't move at all. It looked like they were dead. We were going over to them and almost sort of touching them to see if they had died. And when we unplugged the radiation, they went wild. And this is a video clip of that.
The bees seem disturbed. They're coming out here now. Like, they're just pouring out, flying out, buzzing around. If you look up in the air, there's a big circle motion of bees all the way around the hive. So we're being surrounded by a big mass.
the bees became so aggressive, they were stinging all of us. They were stinging a dog. They were flying after swallows that were in the field. Now, I don't have time to complete this, so I'm just going to skip over some of these slides because I've run out of time, and I'm just going to go to this one. Why are we exposing infants to microwave radiation? The baby monitors that we have, the mats that kids sleep on, are emitting microwaves all the time. They're as bad as Wi-Fi routers. They're making diapers that will connect to your cell phone and tell you that the diaper is wet, which I think is a ludicrous thing to do. And the one that I think is the worst, they're making pacifiers that have a thermometer inside. So if your infant has a fever, you can actually put that thermometer in their mouth and it will tell you your cell phone what their temperature is. Now, my mantra about wireless technology, if it doesn't move, it doesn't need to be wireless. So all smart meters should be wired. If it isn't being used, it should be turned off. If you do use Wi-Fi in your home, turn it off at night. You're not going to be using it then. Just because it can be made wireless doesn't mean it should be made wireless. Try wired technology first. You don't need a wireless keyboard or a wireless mouse. And a society that doesn't protect its children doesn't have a future, and we're doing a really bad job protecting our children. So if any of these mean anything to you, caring for the environment, your health, some of the values I talked about, then it's time for all of us to act. It's not enough for the three of us to sit up here and share our story unless someone does the next step, and I'm not quite certain what that next step is. But at the very least, you can use your voice and share the information, ask other people to share the information. Reduce exposure in your own home. It's not that difficult to do depending on where you live. And contact your, we're in the middle of an election, so contact the members of parliament who are running in your riding and vote for someone who's ethical and knowledgeable about this, because we need to act, and we need to act soon, not later. And these are some useful websites on the left in both Canada and the United States. And we have two choices here. We can go over the falls or we can be rescued. Thank you very much.
Are you taking questions?
We'll take them at the end.
Thank you ever so much, Magda. That was tremendous. I'm a scientist. I first heard about the two big crises that are facing the world, facing us today, in the 1970s. I heard about climate change when I went to a meeting in, it was a camp sort of in Calgary. And I heard about this theory that we were burning a lot of fossil fuels, and this carbon dioxide in the air, it actually can capture heat, and one day, it might actually be warmer. And then I went to, so we've known about climate change for a really long time. A couple of years later, I was working as a summer student in chemical engineering at the University of Toronto, and people were talking about how it was, I should back up. Chemical engineers are basically glorified cooks. And so they take chemicals and they heat them up usually and produce other chemicals. So somebody was talking about using microwave radiation instead of a steam jacket. And I thought, well, that's pretty amazing, but I didn't really think of it. And now I realize that what they were talking about in the 1970s when I was a student actually is what we're seeing in all of our biochemistry today. So Magda has talked about some really important observations, and I'm going to back up a little bit to explain some of the science that underlies that. We don't know it all, but you'll hear from various people, well, science isn't certain, and so that's my job here tonight, is to introduce you to some of the elements of the science that tell us that this is really happening. This is for sure. It's a really important issue, and we've got to get going on it because Health Canada's kind of behind the times on it. So all of our regulations in Canada are based on a false premise, and that false premise is that no harm is going to happen until the tissue is actually heated excessively. So until you're cooked, you're going to be okay. That's not what we're seeing. All of the technology today is designed, and it does not, overtly heat our tissue, but we're still seeing effects. So I'm going to talk about what is called microwave catalysis, and then I'm going to take that into how that affects us and microbes and so on a microscopic scale, and then I'm going to talk about how scientists draw together lines of evidence to say, we're pretty sure about this. So, how many people have studied chemistry? Wow, that's pretty good. Now, chemistry is really important. The best chemist is probably your mother. So, if you're a chemist, you're going to take reactants. And they can be one or two, they can be, a number of chemicals, but we'll just pretend we've got 2 reactants. And then before they react, they have to get aligned. And then during the reaction, electrons are going to shift. And we're going to end up with something that looks very different. So microwave radiation helps to align and helps to shift electrons. And that energy that's needed, that nudge that's needed to align and to shift electrons is called the activation energy. And microwave catalysis happens when the microwave radiation lowers that activation energy, so you need a smaller nudge and chemical reactions happen more quickly. This is well known, it's established, it's used by chemical engineers for hundreds of thousands of chemical reactions. So this is not hypothetical, this is a fact that's used every day. At exactly the same temperature, you have a steam jacket, you're going to get one set of products slowly. You use microwave radiation to take something to exactly the same temperature. Different things will happen much more quickly. So what happens if this happens in our body? In our bodies, our life, our function is a majestic compilation of chemical reactions and movement of electrons. A nervous impulse is movement of electrons. When you breathe in oxygen and you breathe out carbon dioxide, there's all sorts of metabolism that is a bunch of chemical reactions and shifting of electrons. That's how we work. And so some of these chemicals that are involved in making these reactions happen, they're called enzymes, and they have to be non-uniform in order to kind of attract and line up chemicals properly. So these non-uniform molecules are affected by electric fields, and they're also affected by magnetic fields. So we have these enzymes in membranes, and the membranes are like the factory floor for all of the manufacturing, basically, that is happening when we grow and so on and so forth. And this factory floor is made of fat, and it's neutral, and it's not affected as much by these electromagnetic fields. So we have electromagnetic fields that are pulling and pushing on our enzymes that are sitting on a stagnant layer, so they become a little bit dislodged. Another type of chemical, another item that's in these membranes are channels that allow things like calcium and sodium to go through the channels. And once again, those have to have a distribution of charge to make them work. If there's a distribution of charge, and you have rapidly changing magnetic fields, rapidly changing electric fields. They're going to affect these molecules. So for function, in terms of function, we have a perfectly timed machine. And it's a little bit like our car. If all of a sudden the cylinders in your engine started firing at a different speed, that's not going to work so well. But when we have our metabolic pathways, and some parts of it start working faster than others, you end up with chaos, metabolic chaos. And that is how you end up with oxidative stress, how you end up with these membranes on the outside of blood cells that are sticking together, they're not working properly. So what I'm talking about here is just the very basic, right down in the nuts and bolts of biochemistry. Another thing that can happen is that the inside of a nerve, where the electricity is conducted, and you have an impulse that goes down the nerve, is going to be affected differently by electromagnetic radiation than that fatty layer, the myelin, on the outside. So once again, you have different parts of a cell that are affected differently, and this injures the cell. So they're not going to work as well. Yes? Oh, sorry. Okay, that's a lot louder. Okay. Thank you very much for saying that. And then one of the channels that has been discussed by some people, some scientists, is called a voltage-gated calcium channel. And that is a channel that allows calcium to go through the membrane into the cell, or it keeps the calcium out. And these calcium channels are very sensitive to microwave radiation, and when the calcium floods into the cells inappropriately, then once again the calcium acts to help enzymes, so once again you increase this type of dysfunction. So we know about some of the elements of this. We don't have the complete picture, but we know from a fundamental level that cellular dysfunction is going to happen. And we have some glimpses of some of the bits and pieces on this factory floor that we know are malfunctioning when they're exposed to microwave radiation. So you've probably heard about stress, you've heard about oxidative stress. And this can lead to inflammation, it leads to serious neurological problems, it can inhibit the ability of your body to get rid of or to metabolize toxic chemicals or adverse chemicals. There are metabolic pathways and detoxification pathways that are impacted. Another really important thing is that when you have a membrane, but it has these polar things in it, like these channels, and they're exposed to microwave radiation, then that membrane itself becomes permeable. So things that are not supposed to go through it actually do go through it. So we have around our brain, we have the blood-brain barrier that's supposed to protect the brain, but that is broken down somewhat when you're exposed to this kind of radiation. And so one of the clues that supports this is that taking antioxidants can assist some people who are suffering adverse effects. Taking calcium channel blockers can sometimes help people whose symptoms are results of this flood of calcium. And also, we do know that chemical and electromagnetic sensitivities can overlap. People who are sensitive to chemicals can develop electromagnetic sensitivities. People who are electrosensitive can become more sensitive to fragrances and other chemicals in the environment. There's good evidence that this kind of radiation causes DNA damage. Now, we do have some pretty solid evidence regarding this synergism, that where you've got permeabilization of a membrane, and then that allows chemicals to go in. And so this is an interesting study that was done in Korean school children over several years. 2,422 children participated in 27 schools. So this is a very large study, so it's a very powerful study. And they looked at all the socioeconomic things and so on, and corrected for all of that. But the main findings was that they looked at the number of phone calls, so the phone being held to the head of these children, and they also looked at the blood lead levels, because we know that lead in the blood will impact cognition and IQ and behavior. That's well established. And these blood lead levels were comparable to what we see in Canada today. And so we see that the when the blood lead level was fairly low, and even if the blood lead level was in the higher range, as long as there wasn't a lot of microwave radiation, the children were indistinguishable. But when there were more than 3 phone calls a day, which is not that many, and when the blood lead was in the higher range, like they just split it in half. So still not very high. That was when they found more attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So we can't look at one thing in isolation, but the radiofrequency radiation is something that has an off switch, and we know that it can increase the toxicity of other things in this world. Cancer is a very long and complex process, so there are a lot of things that happen along the road that can also lead to other chronic diseases. And with cancer, we're looking at up to 40 years latency, so we may be seeing more of a surge of brain tumors from cell phone use and other tumors coming. So in May of 2011, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, as part of the World Health Organization, determined, they convened a panel, and so these experts, they spoke together for 8 days, and they concluded that it was possible that this radiation from cell phones and so on was causing cancer. But they weren't more certain than that. So what's happened since 2011? We have had a lot more human research. We know that, and IARC has slated that they are going to re-examine this question, because it's really, the field has advanced a lot since 2011. So there's a lot more evidence that cell phone use increases the brain tumors. We've got human case control studies, that's people with tumor, and then you identify controls who perhaps had appendicitis or something in the same hospital. We have analysis of Canadian data showing increased tumors in children and young adults, adolescents and young adults. So we've got pretty strong evidence on the human side. We've got evidence about neuroepithelial, so that's kind of on the outside of the brain. There is evidence about breast cancers, and there's 2 large animal studies. And IARC had said that really the picture was not complete without animal studies. So since 2011, we have more animal studies. Now, although we have potentially a 40-year time lapse, in Canada we don't have this kind of detailed data available yet. They've just started collecting it really. But in England, the gliomas, which is the type of brain tumor that's associated with cell phone use, in the areas that would be associated with cell phone radiation exposure is the red line, and that's been going very up very quickly. This ends in 2014, whereas the number of tumors reported in other parts of the brain, the same kind of tumor, but just further away from what you would expect for cell phone exposure are staying a lot lower. So we're seeing an increase in this very specific type of tumor. This is one example. There are other examples. And anecdotally, this is reported in Canada, but we don't have that data yet. So it's really important that our government and our researchers get that data and use that data. I mentioned that this is the first case of breast cancer that was developed by a very young, fit, healthy, athletic woman who was doing everything right, and she didn't even have bad genetics. And she developed the bright spots or the tumor, the breast goes like that, and it just so happened that when she was running, she put her cell phone in her bra. And so the cell phone was right against the bra for hours a day, and that's where she got the tumor. Since then, there have been many more that have been reported. Here's another, this is a PET scan and what happened was in both of these and others is that it's so unexpected to have breast tumors in such young, healthy women that they go undetected, and so they're only diagnosed when they're metastasized, and they're very aggressive as well. I mentioned that we were missing out on the animal studies. Well, there have been two very large animal studies that have been reported since then. Each of these cost millions and millions of dollars. It's a huge effort. But the National Toxicology Program is financed by the government in the US. They have reported some of their results. Neither of these studies have reported all of their results yet. But they're very long-term studies. The first one looked at 1,260 rats. That's a huge number of rats in very carefully controlled circumstances and so on. And they found that there were increased tumors of the nerve sheath. They're called schwannoma in the heart. Now in people we see them on the auditory nerve right by where the bone is. But this was whole body study, and the heart has a lot of nerve in it, and so these were found in the hearts in this, but it's the same kind of tumors we see in people. Then there were also evidence of increased gliomas, which is the type of tumor that's associated with people and cell phone use. So that was the NTP study was simulating cell phone exposure. Then the Ramazzini Institute, which is in Italy, they were simulating the kind of exposure that you would get from cell phone towers. So this is much lower exposure. But despite it being much lower exposure, they found similar kinds of results. Now another concern that, looking at human data, another concern is fertility. And yes, the sperm are damaged, but in men who have laptops on their laps and in test tubes. And we also know that sperm concentration and total sperm counts have been going down. The most recent stats from Canada were there were over 60% of men in fertility clinics were functionally sterile, and it's a large number of people. How did that happen? So we talked about how with lead, the wireless radiation magnifies other toxicities, and we've seen that in children. We've also seen it in a cancer study. So in this was actually a replicate of a cancer study, and there's something funny with this slide, but the gist of it is that there was one cancer study where they said, okay, we're going to have a carcinogen, and then we're going to have wireless radiation, and see if the wireless radiation makes the cancer development worse. And so that was positive. And then this is people that including some of the experts, said, well, that just doesn't make sense, and so they did a very large study to replicate that, and sure enough, they replicated it quite dramatically, finding 2 kinds of lung cancer as well as liver cancer, and also lymphoma. So around, you can see that there are many, many threads of evidence in this kind of field. And yet when Health Canada is devising its guidelines for Safety Code 6, most of this evidence was not considered. And there's a couple of copies of a poster that we had at a big international conference, scientific conference a few years ago, describing how most of this science was simply not even on the table when Canada was devising its safety guidelines. And I also went with David Mower, who is one of the very top scientists in the world, and he's being honored almost as we speak for his scientific achievements in how you synthesize scientific evidence in medicine. So we went together to see the people at Health Canada, and he was flabbergasted that they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the methods, and they are just not doing the kind of science that is required in the public sector, outside of government, in order to decide, for instance, what kind of drugs we should be allowed to use. So there are better options. Fiber, this is fiber being installed in the rural area. You should have fiber to every home. And I want to thank all of this is a very short list. There's lots more people, and I want to thank the concerned citizens, and I want to thank every single one of you for being here, because I think together we can really make a difference.
Well, thank you. So I am between you and question period, so I'll try to keep this entertaining and as short as I possibly can. I want to thank you for the invitation to present to you this evening and my views on this very important topic, and thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. My name is Trent. I have had the opportunity to spend my entire career in the technology sector. And so I have seen the tremendous benefits that technology can provide. I've seen them firsthand. I've also seen what can happen and the potential harm if technology is not implemented correctly. In my opinion, over the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to meet with experts such as Dr. Havas and Dr. Sears that you've seen tonight, and over a dozen other experts from around the world who spent their careers in evaluating and writing research and doing research on the effects of wireless radiation. In my opinion, the way that we're implementing wireless technology today is not safe and in fact is harmful. That's why about 5 years ago I helped co-found the organization Canadians for Safe Technology. We are a national, non-for-profit organization. It's a coalition of parents, teachers, citizens, and experts. And we have 2 goals. One is to educate and inform Canadians about the dangers of exposures to radiation from wireless technology and how to protect themselves and their families. And the second goal is to work with all 3 levels of government on how to create a safer environment for all of us and our families to live in. 2 years ago, I signed on as a business advisor to the Environmental Health Trust out of the U.S. And really, 2 reasons I did that was the Environmental Health Trust did a lot with similar work that we do in terms of advocating to the government and raising awareness. But they're also one of the few organizations that do that, as well as work directly with local communities in terms of looking at research and funding research in this area. So that's why I've dedicated a lot of my time, so you can see a lot in my schedule. I do a lot of work actually in the U.S. presenting to organizations, governments in the U.S. as well as here across Canada. We've talked about Health Canada. I just want to reflect back a little bit Our track record in North America, whether it's the FCC or Health Canada, is pretty pathetic. Here's a list of some of the things that we missed. And we had the evidence in some cases of cigarette smoking back in the 1960s. Some of the peer-reviewed published papers on the damage of cigarette smoke. And our governments didn't react until decades later. BPA, lead, toxins. I'm particularly concerned now, we talked a little about my industry doing a great job of communicating all the potential benefits. And Cisco has forecasted that there will be 500 billion wireless connected devices by 2030. If you take the number of people that the UN projects as 8 billion by that time, that says there will be almost 60 connected devices per person on the planet. Now that's the average. I would submit in North America we will have the distinction of being at least double that number because there will be some developing countries that may not have any or very few wireless devices per person. So that's why we're particularly concerned about 5G as we start this explosion of devices over the next decade in our lives. Now my industry is also, people will say, well, why aren't we told? Why aren't people telling us that putting a cell phone to our head is harmful? Well, we are being told. Now, if you have an iPhone, just go through the steps: settings, general, about, legal, arm exposure. Now that's obviously, everybody does that, right? Certainly I did the first time my daughter gave me her hand-me-down iPhone. The first thing I did was go through those steps and look at the arm exposure, right? Of course we don't. So legally, my industry is protected because they have warned you